The thing about driving the same route for 11 years is that your body learns the stops before your brain does. I'd pulled off Highway 49 100 times, maybe more, always at the same gas station in Hattiesburg. But that night, the night I'm telling you about, I decided to try the rest area about 6 miles before it. Decommissioned, no lights, no facilities. Just a slab of broken asphalt with weeds pushing through the cracks. I figured it'd be quieter, more private. I just wanted 20 minutes of sleep before I finished the run. Now, anyone who's driven through Mississippi in July knows the heat doesn't leave just because the sun goes down. It sits on you. The air in that lot was so thick with humidity and swamp muck that I could taste it through the cracked window, and the cicadas were going like somebody had wound them up and walked away. I'd parked at the far end, as far from the road as I could get, backed in with the trailer facing the tree line. Spanish moss hung off everything out there, off the oaks, off the scrub pines, thick enough that I couldn't see the moon even though I knew it was up. Just black. The kind of dark where you park and your eyes never adjust because there's nothing to adjust to. I had my boots off, my jacket bunched up behind my head as a pillow. There's this old gray zip-up I've had since I started driving. The one with the broken drawstring I keep meaning to replace. I use it for everything. Pillow, blanket, doorstop when I'm loading on a grade. On the dash, right where it always sits, was my railroad spike. Heavy thing, rusted orange. I picked it up years ago walking a stretch of track through the Delta. I don't know why I kept it. Just felt right. I grab it sometimes when I'm running dark stretches like a worry stone. I closed my eyes. The cicadas were loud but steady, almost rhythmic enough to sleep through. The sleeper cab was stuffy and the vent was clicking every few seconds like it does when the trailer suspension settles in the heat. I was maybe 2 minutes from actually drifting off when I heard something that didn't belong. A dragging sound. Slow. On the asphalt, not on the trailer. Like somebody pulling their feet. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling of the cab for a second. Told myself it was an animal. Coons get bowled out there, possums too. Or it was the trailer settling, the suspension popping and groaning because the frame expands in this kind of heat. That happens. I've heard my rig make noises that sounded like footsteps before, and it was always nothing. But this didn't stop. It was circling. Slow, deliberate, one foot dragging behind the other, working its way around the trailer in a wide arc clack, drag, clack, drag. The same pace, the same interval. Like a metronome. I sat up. My hand went to the light switch out of habit, then stopped. I don't know why I didn't flip it. Something in me said, don't let them know you're awake. And I know how that sounds. But when you're sitting in a dark cab in the middle of nowhere and you hear something circling your truck, you don't think it through. You just go still. I sat there and listened. Clack, drag, clack, drag. It made one full loop. Then it started another. Same direction. Same speed. I kept telling myself it was a person walking, just somebody passing through. Maybe another driver who'd pulled off and was stretching their legs. But people who stretch their legs don't circle a parked truck twice at 2 in the morning at the same exact pace. The cicadas stopped. Just all of them at once. Like somebody flipped a switch. And I want to tell you that's normal, that bugs go quiet when a predator moves through, that it's just nature doing what nature does. But the silence that came down was so complete that I could hear my own breathing bouncing off the inside of the windshield. And the footsteps didn't change. They kept going at the same pace, same rhythm, like the silence didn't concern them at all. I reached forward and gripped the railroad spike. The metal was warm from the dash. Then I saw the silhouette. Came around the front corner of the trailer, and I need to be careful about how I describe this because I didn't get a good look. It was a shape, human-sized, moving in a way that I can only call jerky, like the parts of it weren't quite working together. You know how a person walks and their arms swing in time with their legs? This didn't do that. The arms stayed at the sides. The legs moved, but the upper body stayed fixed. It was like watching something imitate walking without understanding how walking works. Stopped at my door. I was maybe 3 feet from it, separated by the glass. The cab was dark. I hadn't moved. And it just stood there. I could see the outline of a head, maybe shoulders, but the Spanish moss and the dark ate up everything else. Then a hand came up, and I'm not exaggerating when I say the finger on that hand was too long. I don't mean unusually long. I mean it kept going. One finger, pale against the dark, reached out and touched the window frame, and it started tracing, slowly, following the seal of the window all the way around, like it was reading it, like a blind person running their fingers across a page, not looking inside, not trying to see through the glass, just feeling the edge of where I was. My mouth had gone completely dry. My hands were sweating around the spike, and I couldn't loosen my grip because my fingers had locked up. I sat there and I watched this thing trace my window, and I told myself, I said, Silas, if you move now and it's just some strung-out person, you're going to feel stupid. And if you don't move and it's not just some strung-out person, you're not going to feel anything at all. I watched. I'm telling you, I watched. I sat there and I watched it finish tracing the window and reach into its jacket with the other hand. Something came out. Thin. Metal. I heard a click, quiet and precise, and then a scraping sound as it worked whatever it was into the door seal, right at the lock mechanism. The sound was small and mechanical and completely calm. No fumbling, no hesitation, like it had done this before, maybe a lot, and it knew exactly where the weak point was on this model of door. That was when my body decided for me. I don't remember deciding to turn the key. I don't remember putting it in gear. My hands just did it. The ignition caught and I dropped it into first and let the clutch out hard, and the truck lurched forward like it had been shot out of something. Gravel sprayed. The whole rig shook, and the hand came back. It grabbed the side mirror. I saw the arm extend and the fingers wrap around the mirror housing, and then the whole body swung, trying to get on the running board. The face came against the glass. Right there, inches from mine. The eyes were open, wide, and there was nothing behind them. I don't mean angry, I don't mean crazy, I don't mean high. I mean nothing. Like looking into a house where nobody lives and all the lights are off but the door is standing open anyway. I gunned it. The truck surged and the mirror snapped, the whole assembly ripping off the side, and whatever was holding it fell away. I didn't look back. I hit the on-ramp doing 40 in a 20 zone and merged onto the highway, and I did not let off the fuel until I saw the lights of Hattiesburg. I pulled into the first gas station I found, the one with the bright canopy lights and the pumps that are always running. Parked right under the lights. Sat there with the engine running for 10 minutes before my hands would let go of the wheel. My shirt was soaked through under the jacket and I hadn't even been moving. I kept looking at the empty mounting plate where the side mirror used to be, the wires hanging down. I filed a report with the county sheriff the next morning. They sent somebody out to the rest area. Found nothing. No footprints in the gravel, which the deputy said was odd because the ground was soft from rain earlier that week. No other vehicles had been through. The mirror was gone, like it had been picked up and carried off. I haven't stopped at an unlit rest area since. Not in Mississippi, not anywhere. I put deadbolts on the cab doors, the kind that bolt from the inside, and I check my mirrors every few minutes even in broad daylight. I replaced the side mirror, but I kept looking at the new one for weeks, expecting to see that face in it again. The thing I keep turning over is the timing. I didn't decide to move. My body did. I was sitting there watching it work on the lock, trying to talk myself into waiting, trying to be reasonable about it, and then the truck started moving before I'd finished the thought. If I'd been 2 seconds slower, if I'd waited another beat to make sure I wasn't overreacting, I think they would have had the door open. And I don't know what comes after that. I don't know if they wanted the truck or if they wanted me. I don't know what you do with a person at 2 in the morning at a rest area where nobody can see you and nobody can hear you and the bugs have all gone quiet for you. I still drive the Spike, still keep it on the dash. But I grip it a little harder now. Story break. This next one's a different kind of wrong. The person telling it isn't sure they were the victim. Story 2. People ask me why I don't drive anymore, and I usually just say my eyes went bad. That's easier. I drove for 31 years. Most of it was regular freight, the kind of work where you load it, chain it down, sign the manifest, and go. But for about 4 years in the middle there, I was what they called a specialist driver for a company I won't name. Out of a depot outside Meridian. High security place. Fenced, gated, guards at the entrance. The kind of facility that doesn't have a sign out front. Specialist meant I moved things that didn't go through normal channels. No standard manifests, no GPS tracking on the trailer, no way station stops. I'd pick up a sealed container, drive it to a location they'd give me on a handwritten slip, drop it and come back. That was it. The pay was 3 times what I'd been making, and I told myself I was just a cog in a very efficient machine. You don't ask questions when the money's that good. You just drive. The depot itself was a strange place. Massive automated sorting machines that ran all night, humming and clanking, sorting things I never saw. The air always tasted like river water and diesel, and it was heavy, the kind of heavy where you feel it in your chest. Nobody spoke above a whisper there. I don't mean people were quiet. I mean people whispered. Like the building itself was listening and nobody wanted to be the one it heard. You'd go in, sign your slip, pick up your load, and leave. I never saw the same dispatcher twice. I never saw the same guard twice. The layout of that place was designed so you'd never run into anyone face to face unless it was absolutely necessary. I was fine with all of that. I'm a person who's comfortable being alone. Always have been. I had my truck, my route, my brass key on a chain around my neck from the old Vicksburg warehouse terminal where I'd started out, and that was enough. I didn't need company. I needed the check. The first thing that didn't sit right was a manifest. This was maybe 18 months in. I was hooking up a trailer and the seal on the back had a shipping manifest taped to it in a plastic sleeve, which was unusual because we never got manifests. That was the whole point. But this one had slipped through, I guess, or somebody forgot. I pulled it out and looked at it, and the writing on it wasn't English. It wasn't Spanish, wasn't any language I recognized. The characters were tight and angular and they meant nothing to me. And the crate behind it, when I put my hand on the side to check the seal, was cold. Not cool. Cold. Like it had been refrigerated, except the trailer wasn't refrigerated and the seal was room temperature. The sorting machines stopped. Right at that moment. The whole building went quiet. The hum cut out and I was standing there with this manifest in my hand and this cold crate under my palm, and the silence was so sudden that I actually looked up, like somebody had said my name. Then the machines kicked back on. 10 seconds, maybe less. And I told myself it was a coincidence. International logistics, a mislabeled part from an overseas supplier, a glitch in the automated system. I put the manifest back. I hooked up the trailer. I drove. That was the first time. And I want to be clear about something. I'm not telling you this like I was some innocent who stumbled into something. I knew the work was strange. I knew the pay was too high for what I was doing. I knew that normal freight doesn't require you to drive to unmarked warehouses in the middle of nowhere at 3 in the morning. I knew all of that and I kept driving. That's on me. Over the next few months, the deliveries got more frequent. Twice a week became 3 times, then 4. And the drop-off locations were always the same kind of place. Identical metal-sided warehouses, way out in the country, no signage, no other vehicles, no lights except a single flood over the loading bay. I started noticing that these warehouses didn't show up on any maps. Not the trucker atlases, not the county plat maps. I checked. I'm the kind of person who checks. I told myself they were private facilities. Agricultural storage, maybe. Government. The kind of place that doesn't want to be on a map for security reasons. That happens. I've delivered to places like that before. It's not unusual in this line of work. Then the dragging started. I was at a red light on a 2-lane highway in rural Mississippi, maybe an hour out from a drop-off. It was late, after midnight, and the road was empty. And I heard something shift in the trailer behind me. Not the normal shift of cargo settling. Something heavy. Dragging, across the floor of the trailer from one side to the other. Slow. I sat at that red light and I listened to something move inside a sealed container that I had not opened and that nobody else had opened since I'd picked it up. The light turned green. I drove. I told myself it was the cooling fans. Some of those containers had internal climate systems that would kick on and off, and when they did, the condensation would make a sliding sound on the metal floor. I'd heard it before. That's what it was. Except the sound came back. An hour later. And it was louder. And it didn't slide. It scraped. Like something with weight behind it was pulling itself across a metal floor it couldn't get traction on. I turned the radio up. I drove faster. I didn't stop. A few days after that, I was eating breakfast at a diner near the depot, and there was a small TV mounted in the corner playing the local news. A woman had gone missing in a town called Carthage. That was the town where I'd made my last drop-off. The report said she'd been last seen walking home from her shift at a gas station off the highway. The same highway I'd been on, the same stretch I'd driven 3 nights before. I put my coffee down and I stared at that screen and I told myself it was a coincidence. Mississippi is a small state. People go missing. The highway runs through a dozen small towns. It didn't have anything to do with me, but I didn't finish the coffee. The next time I went in for a pickup, my supervisor, a man I'd only seen twice before, walked up to me while I was doing my pre-trip inspection. He didn't say hello. He looked at me and he said, "Some things are better left unopened, Hattie." And the way he said it, the way he looked at me when he said it, I knew he knew I'd been looking at that manifest. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He walked away. I drove the load. I want you to sit with that for a second. A man I barely knew looked me in the eye and told me not to open something, and I hooked it up and I drove it anyway, because the money was good and I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped. The scratching is what broke me. It was my last run. I decided that already, even if I hadn't said it out loud. I was maybe 30 miles from the drop-off, and the sound from inside the trailer was constant. Not dragging anymore. Scratching. Rapid. Desperate, like fingernails on metal, like somebody trapped in a box who'd run out of room to bang and had started clawing instead. It went on for 20 minutes. Then it got quieter. Then it stopped. I pulled off at a turnout. Gravel patch on the side of the road. Nothing around. Dark. I sat in the cab and I told myself it was the cooling system. I told myself it was condensation. I told myself every single thing I'd been telling myself for 4 years, and not one of those explanations could account for the sound of fingernails on the inside of a metal wall. I got out. I walked to the back of the trailer. I broke the seal and I opened the doors. The cargo was gone. Whatever had been in there, if there had ever been parts or equipment or whatever they told me it wasn't there anymore. But the inside walls of the trailer were covered in scratches. Hundreds of them. Deep gouges in the metal, some fresh, some old and rusted. And among the scratches, drawn over and over in different places, were maps. Hand-drawn maps of highways, routes, exits, mile markers. Some of them I recognized. Some of them were routes I had driven. They were trying to figure out where they were. They were trying to navigate from inside a sealed box that was moving at 60 miles an hour down highways they couldn't see. They were drawing the road from the sound of it, from the turns, from the vibrations, from whatever they could feel through the walls. And they'd been doing it for a long time. There were layers of scratches, old ones under new ones. This hadn't happened once. This had been happening for years. On my runs, in my trailer, behind me while I drove and listened to the radio and told myself it was the cooling fans. I closed the doors. I got back in the cab. I drove the trailer to the drop-off and I left it there. Then I drove my truck back to the depot, parked it, took my brass key off the chain and left it on the seat, and I walked out. I didn't call the police. I need you to hear that clearly. I found evidence that I had been hauling people, human beings, in the back of my trailer, probably to places where they were never seen again, and I did not call the police. I was afraid. I was afraid of the company. I was afraid of what would happen to me. I was afraid of what I'd have to say about what I'd done. And I told myself that the evidence was in the trailer and the trailer was at the drop-off and it wasn't my problem anymore. That's what I told myself. And I know what that is. I know what you call a person who finds something like that and walks away to save themselves. I changed my name. I moved to a small town in the Appalachian foothills, a place where nobody knows trucks and nobody asks questions about what you used to do. I gave away the money, every dollar. I couldn't look at it. I couldn't look at my bank account without thinking about what it had bought. I can't drive past a shipping container without my chest tightening up. I avoid highways at night entirely. I haven't been back to Mississippi, and I won't go back. I think about the maps on those walls a lot. I think about how careful they were, how someone in total darkness, in a metal box, had the presence of mind to draw what they could feel of the road, because they believed somebody might find it, because they believed somebody might come. And I think about the fact that somebody did come. It was me, and I came 4 years too late, and I left without telling a single person who could have done anything about it. I don't know if those people are still out there. I don't know if that company is still running. I don't know if there are other drivers like me, right now, hauling sealed containers down dark highways, listening to sounds they've trained themselves not to hear. And I don't know, even now, even with the distance and the new name and the hills between me and that depot, whether I'm done with it. Whether it's done with me. Whether the thing I carried isn't still moving, somewhere out there on a road I used to know, still waiting for somebody to open the door. I gave the money away, but I kept the key. Story break. This third account is quieter. The kind of thing that settles into a place before you get there. Story 3. I moved into my uncle's house about 2 years after he died. Nobody had been living in it and the family was going to sell it, but I needed a place and the price was right, meaning free. I'd been between things. Between jobs, between apartments, between whatever you call it when you're a long-haul driver who's been sleeping in his cab for 6 months and his truck needs a repair he can't afford. The house was outside Natchez, set back off a parish road, surrounded by fields that hadn't been planted in years. Dry hay and old wood, that's what the place smelled like. From the inside and the outside, like the whole house had been marinating in the same air for decades. It was quiet. That was the main thing. I'd been living in noise for so long that the quiet felt like a physical change, like stepping out of water. The house was old and drafty, a 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a cellar, and it made sounds. The settling sounds old houses make. I'd be reading or eating dinner and I'd hear a pop from somewhere in the walls, a deep wooden creak, and I'd think, there it goes. The house is breathing. I know that sounds like I'm setting something up, but I don't mean it that way. Old houses settle. That's what they do. I was grateful for the sounds, honestly. They gave the place some life. I kept my grandfather's silver compass on the nightstand. He'd been a surveyor, and the compass was old and the needle was sticky and it didn't point north anymore. But I'd hold it in my hand sometimes when I was thinking about the past, just to have something solid to grip. It was a habit I'd had since I was a kid. My grandfather gave it to me and told me, Bram, sometimes you just need to hold on to something that knows where it's going, even when it doesn't. The first week was fine. I cleaned, I unpacked, I fixed the screen door that wouldn't latch. The second week, I started noticing the hallways. I'd be walking from the kitchen to the den and I'd feel like I was going downhill. Not steep, not dramatic, just a slight pull. Like the floor was off by a fraction of an inch and my body knew it even though my eyes couldn't see it. I mentioned it to my cousin on the phone and she laughed and said the house had always been crooked, that my uncle used to say you could set a marble down in the upstairs hallway and it'd roll to the den on its own. I laughed too. Old house, crooked floors. That's all. But I started paying more attention after that. And once I started paying attention, things started adding up in a way I couldn't quite get to sit right. There was a pair of boots in the cellar. Work boots, my size, broken in exactly where I break mine in, on the outside of the left heel. I hadn't brought boots to the house. I hadn't been in the cellar before that day. I picked them up and turned them over and they were mine. Not the same model. The same boots. The same scuff on the toe from when I kicked a tire iron in a parking lot in Little Rock. I told myself my uncle must have had a similar pair. I told myself I was misremembering. I put them by the back door and tried not to think about it. A week after that, I found a set of keys in a drawer in the kitchen. They had a keychain with my initials on it. BF, stamped into a little circle of metal. The keys were to my truck. Not a similar truck. My truck. I could tell because one of them had the scratch on the fob where I dropped it in a truck stop bathroom in Texarkana and it had hit the urinal on the way down. I remember that because it was one of those days where everything was going wrong and that was the moment I actually laughed at how bad the day was. I stood in the kitchen holding my own keys and I tried to figure out how they'd gotten there. I had another set, the set I carried every day. These were a duplicate. Someone had made a duplicate of my truck keys and stamped my initials on the keychain and put them in a kitchen drawer in a house I'd never lived in before 2 weeks ago. I told myself my uncle had made them. He'd been a truck driver too before he got sick. Maybe he'd had access to my truck at some point, maybe he'd made copies as a favor, maybe he was the kind of person who worried about his nephew locking himself out. It was thin, but it was something. I put the keys in a drawer in my bedroom and I tried to move on. Then I found the journal. It was in the den, behind a loose floorboard I'd pried up looking for where a draft was coming in. The floorboard came up easy, Too easy, like it had been lifted and put back a lot. Underneath was a space about the size of a shoebox, and inside the space was a notebook, a composition notebook, the black and white marbled kind, and a set of handwritten logs, loose pages, folded neatly. The logs were mine. I mean, they were truck logs. Mileage, routes, dates, times. My routes. The ones I'd been driving for the last 2 years. My delivery times, my fuel stops, my rest breaks. All of it written out in a handwriting I didn't recognize, small and precise, the letters tight together. Every route I'd taken in the last 24 months was there, laid out in order, with details I hadn't even recorded for my own company. Times I'd stopped for coffee, which exits I'd taken, how long I'd idled at a way station in Alabama. I sat on the floor of the den with these pages in my lap, and I told myself my uncle had kept them. He was a trucker. He kept logs. Maybe he'd been following my routes somehow, tracking my GPS, writing it all down. Maybe it was a hobby. Maybe he was proud of me and this was his way of staying connected. It was the best I had, and I held on to it, and I put the pages back under the floorboard and I went to bed. The journal was worse. I opened it the next morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and the first entry was dated 3 years before I'd ever set foot in the house. 3 years before my uncle died. 5 years before I moved in. And it described my day. Not a day like my day. My actual day. Where I'd been, what I'd done, what I'd thought about while I was driving. The entries described conversations I'd had. Specific conversations. The time I called my dispatcher from a rest area outside Memphis and told him I was going to be late because of a blown tire. The time I talked to a waitress at a diner in Shreveport about the weather. Things I'd said, paraphrased but close enough that I could hear my own voice in the words. My habits were in there. That I drink coffee black. That I drive with my left hand at 12 o'clock on the wheel. That I talk to myself when I'm tired, just little comments about the road, about other drivers, about nothing. It went back years. Entries spanning the entire time I'd been driving professionally, starting before I'd ever visited Mississippi, before I'd ever known my uncle was sick, before I'd ever heard of this house. And every entry was someone watching me. Someone who knew where I was, what I was doing, what I was saying, and was writing it all down in a composition notebook behind a loose floorboard in a farmhouse outside Natchez. I put the journal down. I picked up the compass from the nightstand and I held it and I sat there for a long time. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I should have left right then. And maybe you're right. But I didn't. I told myself there had to be an explanation. My uncle had been a trucker. He'd had connections. Maybe he'd hired somebody to follow me. Maybe he'd been worried about me. Maybe he'd been recording me for some reason that made sense to him and would make sense to me if I could just find the right piece of the puzzle. I was in the house for free. I had nowhere else to go. And the idea of packing up and leaving over a journal felt dramatic. It felt like something a person in a story would do, not something I would do. So I stayed. And I kept finding things. The audio equipment was the last thing. I'd been in the house about 3 weeks at that point, and I'd started to feel like the house was paying attention to me. Not in a way I could name. Just the rooms felt different when I walked into them. Like the air had been doing something and stopped when I came through the door. The settling sounds had changed too. They were more frequent at night, more deliberate sounding, less like a house breathing and more like a house moving around while it thought I was asleep. I found the hatch in the den floor. Different floorboard from the one with the journal. This one was flush, invisible unless you knew to look, and I only found it because I was on my hands and knees caulking the baseboard and my knee went through the seam. A trapdoor, hinged, with a handle recessed into the wood. Underneath was a crawl space, small, maybe 4 feet by 6, windowless, lined with insulation. And inside the crawl space was a desk. On the desk was audio recording equipment. A mixing board, a set of headphones, a hard drive, and microphones, small ones, the kind you wire into walls. The equipment was running. The hard drive light was blinking green. The mixing board had levels moving, real-time, channels active. I could hear a faint clicking. The equipment was cycling. Channels clicking on, clicking off. On-off. Like it was selecting inputs. Like it was listening to different parts of the house and choosing which one to record. I put the headphones on. I don't know why. I don't know what I expected to hear. What I heard was myself. My own voice, from that morning, clear as if I was standing next to myself. I was talking about the house, about whether I should sell it, whether the land was worth anything, whether I should just sign it over to my cousin and be done with it. I'd said all of that out loud to myself in the kitchen while I was making eggs. And the recording had it. Every word. The tone of my voice, the way I trailed off at the end of a sentence, the way I said, I don't know, twice in a row because I wasn't really talking to anyone. The house had been recording me. Not just my words. My mornings, my evenings, my conversations with myself, my silence. From the moment I'd set foot on the property. And the equipment wasn't old. It wasn't dusty. The headphones were warm. The hard drive was nearly full. I took the headphones off. I climbed out of the crawl space. I closed the hatch. I put the floorboard back. I put the compass in my pocket. I grabbed my truck keys from the bedroom. I did not pack anything. I did not take the journal, the logs, the keys, the boots. I walked out the front door, got in my truck, and drove. I didn't stop until I crossed the state line into Louisiana, and even then I only stopped because I needed gas. I never went back. I called a demolition company and I had the house torn down. I told my cousin it was termite damage. She believed me, or she said she did. I didn't keep the property. I didn't keep anything that had been in the house. I should have called the police. I should have taken the journal and the logs and the recording equipment to somebody who could have figured out who put it there and why. I know that. I chose not to. I chose to make it disappear instead. And I've gone back and forth on whether that was me protecting my sanity or me destroying evidence because I didn't want to know what it pointed to. I still don't have a clean answer for that. What I know is this. The recordings went back years. The logs went back years. The journal went back years. All of it started before I ever knew the house existed. And my uncle, the man who left me the house, had been a truck driver who kept to himself and died quietly and never mentioned any of this to anyone. I had the house demolished. I had the debris hauled away. I had the lot graded and seeded with grass. And some nights, when I'm in a quiet room, I can still hear the clicking. That soft, regular clicking of channels cycling on and off, like something selecting which part of me to listen to next. I don't know if my uncle was the one recording me, or if he was just the latest person to maintain the equipment. I don't know if the house was his project or if he inherited it the same way I did, and he just lasted longer than I did before he ran. The compass still doesn't point north. I hold it anyway. It's the only thing from that house I kept. And some nights it's the only thing in my hand when I wake up and the room is too quiet and I can't tell if I'm being listened to or if I've just forgotten how to be alone without feeling like something is paying attention. Story break. This last one is the story I keep coming back to. Story 4. The computer was typing my name when I walked in. I don't mean it was displaying it. I mean it was typing it character by character, the cursor moving across the screen, letter by letter, the way a person types. MERIT over and over, filling the search field, clearing it, filling it again. The night clerk's station was empty. The chair was pushed back like somebody had just stood up. The monitor was the only light in the lobby, and it was painting my name on the wall behind the desk in flickering blue letters. I stood there. I think I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, which doesn't sound like long, but when you're watching a computer type your name in an empty room, 10 seconds is a lot. My hand went to my collar, to the silver pin my grandmother gave me when I graduated, the one I touch when I'm anxious, and I was touching it before I realized I'd reached for it. I walked behind the counter. That's what you do when you're the night shift manager and something's wrong with the system. You go look at it. You check the logs. You figure out what's running and you stop it. That's the job. Let me back up. I need to explain how I ended up here or none of this makes sense. I'm 23. I got hired as the night shift manager at a truck stop motel off Interstate 55, just south of Brookhaven, about 2 weeks ago. The place was new, or at least renovated. Sterile looking, everything gray and white and clean. It smelled like ozone and industrial cleaner, that sharp chemical smell that makes your nose itch, and the HVAC hummed constantly, this low tone that sat right at the edge of where you stop hearing it consciously but your body knows it's there. The air was cold, aggressively cold, the kind of air conditioning that feels like it's doing it on purpose. The manager who trained me, a guy named Dale, told me the hotel was a bit strange. His words. He said it the way people say that when they mean something worse but don't want to be the one who said it. He told me not to worry about it, that I'd get used to it, that every building has its quirks. He'd been there 8 months and he seemed fine, so I figured it was just the kind of place that made sounds or had a weird guest or two. You work hospitality, you see strange things. Comes with the job. The thing I noticed first, the thing that Dale didn't mention, was the room numbers. Every door on every floor had a number plate, but they were all slightly off. Not crooked, not hanging loose. Just positioned wrong. Like whoever installed them had started at one end of the hall and drifted half an inch at a time, so that by the time you got to the end, the numbers were almost a full inch lower than where they started. It was subtle enough that you'd walk past it 3 times before you noticed, and then once you noticed, you couldn't unsee it. It made the whole hallway feel like it was tilted, even though the floor was level. I noticed it on my first night. On my second night, I noticed the registration book. It was a physical book, which was odd for a modern hotel. Most places are fully digital now. But there was this leather-bound guest register on the counter, and during a quiet stretch around 3 in the morning, I'd opened it, mostly out of boredom. Every line, going back 3 months, had the same name on it. Mine, Merritt Vance. Page after page, the same name, the same handwriting, in blue ink on every single line. 3 months of entries. I hadn't been working here 3 months. I'd been in the state for 2 weeks. I closed the book. I told myself it was a prank. A previous employee, somebody who'd been fired or quit badly, had done it to mess with whoever came next. That happens in hospitality. People leave surprises for the next person. I'd heard about it, read about it, figured this was just a more elaborate version. I put the book back under the counter and I didn't think about it again until the computer started typing my name. So there I was, behind the counter, looking at the screen. I pulled up the system logs. There was a script running, a simple one, just a text input loop, typing my name into the search field and clearing it. The script had been initiated from the front desk terminal, which was the terminal I was standing at a time when I'd been in the parking lot doing a perimeter check. The system showed my login credentials, my user ID, my password, the one I'd set on my first day, the one I hadn't shared with anyone. My fingers were on the keyboard and I was trying to trace the script's origin when the phone rang. The front desk phone. The one that's supposed to ring when a guest calls the lobby. I picked it up because that's what you do. That's the job. The voice on the other end sounded like me. Not like me. It was me. My voice, my exact cadence, the way I pause in the middle of sentences, the way I swallow certain words. It said, "You need to check room 204. And then it said, "You're standing behind the counter right now. You're holding the phone in your left hand. You're touching the pin on your collar with your right hand." I was doing exactly that. I looked down at my hand on the pin and I let go like it was hot. The voice kept going. It described what I was wearing. It described the way I was standing, weight on my left foot, leaning on the counter. It told me the script had been running for 11 minutes and that I'd been in the parking lot when it started. It told me I was going to go upstairs and check 204, and it said it with the kind of certainty that made me feel like I was listening to a recording of something that had already happened. I hung up. I stood there. I told myself it was a recording, a very good one, that somebody had captured my voice somehow and was playing it back to mess with me. I told myself the system had been accessed remotely and the script was a prank, an extension of the registration book, the same person, the same joke. I told myself I was new and somebody was testing me, seeing how the new guy handled pressure. I told myself all of that and I almost believed it, and then I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and I walked to the stairwell because my legs were already going and my brain hadn't caught up. The hallway on the second floor was empty. The HVAC hum was louder up there, or maybe it just felt louder because there was nothing else. The room numbers drifted downward as I walked, 201, 202, 203, each one a little lower than the last, and by the time I got to 204, the number plate was almost at the hinge line of the door. The door was open, not ajar, wide open. The lights were off inside and the flashlight beam caught nothing but bare walls. No bed, no furniture, no carpet. Just a concrete floor and bare drywall. And a mirror, leaning against the far wall, but turned around, the reflective side facing the wall, the brown backing facing me. I stood in the doorway. I checked the bathroom, the closet. Empty. The room had been stripped. I couldn't figure out why a guest room would be completely empty in a hotel that had been open for 2 months. I walked over to the mirror. It was a full-length mirror, heavy, the kind that bolts to a wall. Someone had taken it down and turned it around. I put my hand on the frame and I turned it. The glass showed the room behind me. The door, the hallway light through the open door, the empty concrete floor. And me, standing there, holding the flashlight, the pin on my collar catching the light. And behind me, in the mirror, not in the room, a second figure. Standing where nobody had been standing when I turned around to check. A person my height, my build, wearing my uniform with my face. Looking at me from the mirror with an expression I've never seen on my own face. Not hostile. Not afraid. Patient. Like they'd been waiting for me to turn the mirror around for a long time. I didn't scream. I want to be clear about that. I didn't scream because my body didn't give me time to scream. My arm pulled back and I hit the mirror with the flashlight as hard as I could and the glass broke. It broke outward, toward me, and I felt pieces of it hit my jacket and my hands, and I was already running before the sound of the breaking stopped. I made it to the stairwell. I was taking the stairs 2 at a time and I heard it behind me, from the second-floor hallway. Laughing. My laugh. The way I laugh when something catches me off guard and I can't help it. That exact laugh, coming from a hallway I just left, getting quieter as I went down. I hit the lobby at a run. I looked back up the stairwell. The hallway on the second floor was empty. The door to 204 was still open. The light from the hallway fell across the floor of the room and I could see the broken mirror, the shards on the concrete, and in the shards, reflections of the ceiling, reflections of the walls, reflections of the empty room. No figure. No person. Just angles and light and an empty room. I grabbed my bag from behind the counter. I walked out the front door. And as I crossed the parking lot, from somewhere behind me, from the dark lobby or the open stairwell or the room on the second floor with the broken mirror, I heard my name. Just my name. In my voice. Called out the way you call to somebody who's walking away from you, like you want them to stop, like you're not finished talking. I didn't stop. I got in my car and I drove to the police station in Brookhaven, and my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel, and I kept checking the rearview mirror because some part of me expected to see my own face in the back seat. The police went out to the hotel. They found the room empty. They found the broken glass on the floor. They found the registration book, which I showed them, and they agreed that someone had written my name in it, but they couldn't explain the handwriting. Neither could I. They pulled the security footage. The lobby camera showed me walking in. It showed me standing behind the counter. It showed me picking up the phone. It showed me walking to the stairwell. But there was a gap. 14 minutes between me leaving the counter and entering the stairwell, where the footage just showed an empty lobby. I don't remember 14 minutes. I remember walking straight from the counter to the stairs. They couldn't explain it. The case went into a file and nobody called me about it again. I haven't worked a night shift since. I avoid mirrors when I can. I changed the bathroom mirror in my apartment to a small one, just big enough to shave with, because full-length ones make me check what's behind me and I can't stop checking. I live in a state of something I can't name, this low hum of unease that sits right where the HVAC sat, right at the edge of where you stop noticing it consciously but your body always knows it's there. I've gone over it 100 times. If there was a person in that hotel who looked exactly like me, a twin I never knew about, someone who'd been watching me long enough to know my voice and my habits and the way I stand, then maybe the phone call was a recording and the mirror was a trick and the laughing was a speaker hidden in the wall. Maybe. I can almost get there. But the registration book. 3 months of entries in my handwriting. My handwriting. The way I cross my T's low and loop my G's and write my E's too small. Starting 2 months and 28 days before I ever set foot in the state of Mississippi. A twin can learn your handwriting, but not before you know they exist.